Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. She's the best-selling author of the Kookaburra Creek Café and the Cottage at Rosella Cove, and she's fast becoming an author whose name is on everyone's lips. Sandie Docker first graced this podcast back in 2018 in one of my very first episodes. In fact, I think it was episode number 2. Back then, she was a debut author, and I had just read the Kookaburra Creek Café, and I fell head over heels in love with the characters and the small-town charm she managed to weave throughout the pages of that devastatingly gorgeous book. I remember confessing at the time that it was the first book in a long time that had made me cry. So affected was I by the heartache and tragedy, but also the sense of hope that filled its pages. Today, Sandie is back on the podcast again, and this time we're talking about her third novel, The Banksia Bay Beach Shack. Officially released across Australia today, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this book. In fact, I think I love this book even more than the Kookaburra Creek Café. It will forever hold a special place in my heart for reasons that will become obvious to anyone who reads it. Not only is Sandie one of Australia's rising star novelists, I am lucky enough to call her friend, and I'm delighted to welcome Sandie back to the podcast today. Hey, Sandie.
Hi, Claudine. I'm not sure I can live up to that hype, though. Thank you.
You most certainly can. Now, Sandie, one of the things that you do spectacularly well is setting. Each of your books has been set in a small coastal town, a place that is as much a character as any of the people that live there. What is it that draws you to write about these towns?
I think it would have to be my upbringing. I grew up in Coffs Harbour back in the days when it was only 25,000 people. And it was very much a small town. It still is a small town today. And all of my childhood was in and around towns like that, up and down the coast, inland. And now that I live in Sydney, I really, really miss being part of that sort of a community. And I think that's why I write about it so much.
Where did the idea for this book come from?
Anyone who's been to any of my author talks will know I have really terrible origin stories for my novels. I would love to be able to say, something like I was trekking through the Himalayas and came across a village of hidden monks and that sort of thing. But I don't. I have really awful origin stories. And this one is just as boring as all of my others in that I was at home in Coffs Harbour one Christmas a couple of years ago, and it had just rained, and we went for a walk along one of the local beaches up there. And I don't know if you've ever walked along a beach after rain. The sand is always damp and really, really cold. And I had a flashback to what was, I'm assuming, a childhood memory of sitting on that damp, cold sand and the chill actually seeping right through your skin and into your bones. And I had a picture of a woman sitting on the sand during a rainstorm and not being moved to leave her spot despite the fact that the chill was entering her bones. And that was the first image in my head. And I said to myself, who is this girl? Why is she still sitting here in this storm? What's going on with her? And that was the very beginnings of the Banksia Bay Beach Shack.
I have been lucky enough to have read this book, but for those who haven't, can you tell me a little bit more about the story?
Sure. It's a story of first love and last chances, and a story of the truths and the lies that we tell that can affect people far into our future without us even realising it. We meet Laura, our protagonist, and she's at her grandmother's funeral, and a few things surprise her around this time. She is shown a photo of her grandmother as a child on a beach with an inscription that says Sisters of Summer 1961. And the two things that Laura absolutely knows about her grandmother are that she never liked the beach and she never had a sister. So Laura starts to ask some questions about her grandmother's past, and when she's going through her things, she discovers a broken pendant, a beautiful Art Deco style piece. She starts putting two and two together, and she wants to figure out what happened in her grandmother's past. So she heads to Banksia Bay to find out the truth about her grandmother Lillian's history.
So the book flips between the past and the present, and I wanted to focus a little bit on the glimpse of life in the 1960s Australia. I think it's fair to say that there was a simplicity to life back then that from today's perspective seemed somewhat idyllic. But you've managed to put a microscope over that era and get us to look a little bit more closely at what was happening then. And when we do, we see the tensions that are bubbling under the surface. For example, not only was it a challenging time for women generally, but there was this spectre of involvement in the Vietnam War and a time in which the face of Australia changed markedly with the government's open migration policies. So I wanted to ask you, was it always your intention to write a story set in the 1960s?
I always love it when I get asked if it was my intention to do something in the story, because I am one of the biggest pantsers there is. And for those who don't know, pantser is a term we use in the writing industry for somebody who flies by the seat of their pants. So I don't plan or plot any of my novels. I start, in this particular case, with the scene of the girls sitting on the beach, and I just write until the story tells me where it wants to go. So it wasn't my intention to write anything from that perspective, but that was where the characters told me they wanted to be, and so I went with them, and I'm glad that I did, because it was a really interesting era for me to explore.
Indeed. As I said, there was lots going on in 1960s Australia that you managed to shine a light on in a really evocative way, I felt.
Yeah, thank you. I had to do a bit of research, obviously. I'm a child of the 70s, so it's not an era that I have lived through, so I had to do some research there. And what I find is if I focus on my characters rather than the era or the history, they lead me to the right parts of research that I need to find. So, yeah, I had to research when and how the Vietnam War played out in Australia. I had to research post-World War II migration. Where did our migrants come from in that era? What had they come from? One of the things that I learned that I never knew about was the fact that Greece went into a civil war after World War II, and that was a part of history I knew nothing about. So that was really interesting for me too.
Now, you and I have talked a little bit about the migrant experience in Australia before, but it was something that Todd, one of the less savoury characters in this book, I have to say, said that made me realise that despite the passage of time, some Australians have the same response to migrants now as they did back then. Is that something that crossed your mind as you were writing this book, and was this something you wanted to shine a light on, even though you've said that you're a pantser?
No. Once I realised that was where we were going, yeah, it was absolutely something that I thought was really important to do. And hopefully not in a heavy-handed way. It's not a story about migration and the struggle of migrants. It's part of who the characters are. And I think what's really interesting about it, as you said, it's the same attitudes today. The target is different. Back then it was the Greeks and the Italians, which today we couldn't even imagine feeling that way towards Greek and Italian migrants. Today it's a different set of people. And I think what it shows is that as human beings, we have the same flaws, no matter what generation we are from, no matter what era in history we are from. Sometimes the face changes, but the actual issues are still the same.
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, even though we never get to hear Lily's story from her own point of view, her story gives the novel what I felt was a city versus country divide. She's a well-to-do daughter of a politician from Sydney. She's expected to behave and dress in a certain way. She goes to a deportment school and is expected to marry appropriately. But Gigi, on the other hand, is a down-to-earth country girl who helps her family run their business, who wears overalls most of the time and barely manages to brush her hair most days.
A bit like me.
Yeah, and me, I assure you. But despite these differences, they share an incredible bond, didn't they?
They really did. And I don't know if this came across in the novel, but for me, with them living inside my head, I think what drew them together was a mutual loneliness. They both didn't really fit in where they were supposed to, and I think they were both really lonely. And when they found each other, they found kindred spirits, despite the fact that they were from two completely different worlds.
I love Gigi. In fact, for me, she's the hero of this novel. She loved Lily and she savoured the precious summers that they spent together, but she wasn't a pushover. She saw things for what they were and she wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in. And at the same time, she was an incredibly loyal friend, but this had terrible consequences for her, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. We won't go into spoilers, obviously.
Yeah.
That is part of her life's story there, that her loyalty to her friends was actually what undid the path of her life, if we can say that. And she maintains that loyalty right up until she's an old woman in the modern thread of the story. And that's one of the things she struggles with. Does she maintain this loyalty? Does she set the truth free? Does she keep her secrets? And that's a life struggle for her.
Laura is the link between the past and the present for the residents of Banksia Bay, and she poses a threat to the secrets and the guilt that Virginia has held on to for the last 60 years. And reading Virginia's story, I found myself saying, if only she'd done this and things might have been different for her, if only she hadn't done that. Guilt over what she did and didn't do was what ultimately shaped her life, and it made me feel incredibly sad for everything that she lost in the process. Now, having read all three of your beautiful novels to date, guilt is an emotion that runs deep throughout your writing, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm sure a psychologist would probably have a field day with me over that. I think guilt is one of those emotions that when it takes hold of you, when it's proper guilt, and I don't mean just forgetting to put the washing on, which we all do, all the time, but, true guilt like what Virginia carries with her, it really does eat into your life and it affects every other aspect of your life, even things that are seemingly unrelated. Your behaviour to those situations, I have found, in my own life experience, can be changed by that veil of guilt. And so, I do like to explore that a bit. And I hope I've done it in different ways with each of those novels. But I think it's a really important thing. And it's something we don't get over very easily either.
I don't think I'll ever forgive you for the cruel plot twist that took this story in directions I never expected. And you broke my heart in the process. However... There it is, that cruelty again.
I know. Psychologist again is going to have a field day with me.
However, as a writer, I appreciate the way these unexpected developments keep readers on the edge of their metaphorical seats and glued to the pages to find out what happens next. So I wanted to ask you, is this something that you find yourself consciously doing when you're actively in the process of writing? Thinking about ways to, make it more dramatic?
No, again, we're assuming that there is some conscious thought when I write. And there really isn't. I think I'm probably exposing myself a little bit too much here. No, as a writer, I understand the necessity of playing with the good and the bad, the happy and the sad, those dichotomies of life. And I think it's only natural when you're exploring characters who are in our heads real people and exploring their lives, that those things come up, because that's what life is like for all of us. We have happy moments and sad moments, and we have joy mixed with tragedy. And it's how we interact with both the joy and the tragedy in our life that makes us who we are. So as a writer, when you're exploring your characters and who they are, I think it's just a natural part of the writing process. I may have taken things a bit far with this one. My sister still hasn't forgiven me, and she read it back in October when it was in one of its early drafts, and she will never forgive me. I laugh now and I say yay, but what we want ultimately as writers is to connect with our readers on an emotional level. We want them to feel happy. We want them to have their heart broken. We want them to clap and laugh and cry and all of those things. So if we do manage to do that, then, we've done our job right, I think.
Well, you certainly hit a home run with this one.
Thank you.
Sandie, given there are many writers who listen to this podcast, what top 3 tips would you offer about the writing process?
Can I be a little bit cheeky, Claudine, and say my top 3 tips are write, and write.
That's not cheeky.
It's kind of cheating. The most important thing you can do as a writer is to write. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it actually isn't to a lot of people. I know an awful lot of people within my circle, within other circles I see on forums, all the writers' forums, that talk about being a writer and they're wanting to write, and some of them haven't written a word. And I'm like, well, you can't be a writer if you actually haven't written a word. And like with anything we do in life, the more you do something, the better you get at it. And so the more you write, the better you're going to be. And that will then give you the best chance of becoming an author at the end of the day. It's so, so important. It doesn't matter what you're writing. It doesn't matter if it's an absolute piece of garbage like my first manuscript was. You still learn something from it. So, yeah, write, and then write some more.
Fantastic. You've broken it down into what it really is, and that is bum on seat and actually sit down and write. So thank you for that.
No, that's okay. If you want to be a fashion designer, can't be a fashion designer without making fashion. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing.
Now, as you know, commercial fiction writing is hugely popular in Australia, and there are many stellar Australian authors like yourself who work incredibly hard putting out a book a year. But I think it's fair to say that there are very few forums that celebrate commercial fiction writing as distinct from literary. Why do you think that is?
I don't know if it's a deep-seated cultural issue that we have when we watch the Logies, for example, the Australian Television Awards. We always have to have that American import hosting the show. We're always looking for that external validation, I guess, that we need to be good enough. And so if we're winning prizes, then we're good enough. And all the literary prizes go to those literary works, which is fine, that, they have their place. But it's the commercial guys that keep the industry ticking over at the end of the day. And these are the books that readers love to read. They're the books that readers connect with. And I think it's really important that we start to celebrate our Australian commercial authors. We have so many fantastic authors writing in the genres of crime, of historical fiction, of romance, of contemporary fiction. We need to celebrate them more and showcase them not only to Australia but to the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That was a little bit of a loaded question simply because I have inside knowledge on an exciting development in this space, one that you've instigated. So could you tell me about this exciting project that you've been working on?
Yeah, so through my travels, going to author events and meeting readers both in person and online, and meeting other authors within the commercial sphere, I decided that I would create my own literary festival, just a small undertaking, and with focus to be on writers from those genres of crime and romance and contemporary and historical. And I have created the Northern Beaches Readers Festival, very deliberately using readers in the name, because for me as a writer and for so many of us, it's about connecting with our readers. And at this stage, it is planned to happen on the northern beaches of Sydney in Avalon in September this year. And we have an amazing cast of authors signed up. Am I allowed to do a little bit of name dropping?
Oh, totally. Go for it.
Okay. So we have authors like Rachel Johns coming, Sally Hepworth, Candice Fox, Michael Robotham, Kate Forsyth, Christian White, Chris Hammer. I could go on and on. We have a brilliant array of authors that are just jumping at the chance to connect with their readers in this kind of a forum.
Well, it sounds like a fabulous festival. I know I will be there with bells on. Now, I know that there is a lot of concern out there at present. Many book events and festivals are being cancelled due to the current global health crisis, but you're not making any decisions about the festival at this stage, are you?
No, the festival is scheduled at this point in time for the end of September. And the truth is, none of us know how this is going to play out within the Australian society over the next, few weeks or few months. So we're just going to sit tight on that at the moment. Probably come the end of April, beginning of May, we will look again at the situation and just see where we're sitting with this global health crisis, and we'll make a decision then. If the worst case scenario happens, that's fine. We will just put it on next year.
So, Sandie, what would you say you would most like to achieve with a festival of this nature?
I want to show to Australia at large just how wonderful our commercial fiction writers are and how much our readers enjoy this area of fiction, and I want to bring those readers into a warm, fuzzy, wonderful setting where they can really connect with those writers.
I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful and very successful festival.
I hope so. Looking forward to it.
Are you working on another book at the moment?
Yes, I'm actually on deadline at the moment, and being the pantser that I am, deadlines and I are not very good friends. So my next manuscript, which is called The Wattle Island Book Club, is due into my publisher just after Easter, actually. So I am frantically trying to get that finished right now.
Well, best of luck with that, and I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that in the future.
Yes, I hope you'll have me back next year to talk about it.
Oh, most definitely. Sandie, if readers wanted to connect with you, how can they find you?
I am on Facebook. That's predominantly where I hang out. I'm also on Instagram, and I have a website, which is, surprise, surprise, www.sandiedocker.com.
So finally, in the current climate, obviously we want everyone to stay healthy and if possible be at home. And reading is one of those things that can help us take our mind away from our worries, even if only for a little while. So I wondered, did you have any tips for people who may like to get their hands on your book but can't get out and about at the moment?
Yeah, reading is such a wonderful escape, even if it is just momentary from the worries and the stresses that we have in the world. Even a book like mine that may make you cry, it's still a great escape from the everyday. And I really hope that if people are having to isolate, that they take to reading as one of those ways to just chill out and relax. And if you can't get to a bookstore, obviously all the local bookstores will have the books in stock and will be happy to sell them to you. But if you can't get out or you're worried about getting out, there are online places you can go. And one of my favourites is Booktopia. It's my favourite because it's an Australian company. All the money stays here. We're supporting a small local business, and they have books in stock. And if they don't have them in stock, they get them in. And they sell print books, ebooks, and audiobooks as well.
Sandie, it's always a pleasure to chat to you. I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Claudine. It's always fun chatting with you.
And listeners, for your chance to get your hands on a signed copy of Sandie's gorgeous new book, head to my Instagram or Facebook accounts and follow the prompts to win. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.